Namaste and good morning. This is Rajan Kotru, but maybe I start that we have a famous quote from the Alps: don't speak much about yourself, leave it to us when you're gone. I would like to be thanking Govind Pant National Institute of Himalayan Environment for giving me an opportunity to speak in this Himalayan Conclave. It is very timely, organized event, and we as Himalayan citizens, I would say, really deserve a very, very serious discussion on our mountains, which is essentially represented by our Indian Himalayan region in our country. Now, if I might think about Himalayas, what really brings me to regional cooperation is if I go a little bit back and if I talk about Kalidasa, who said or who wrote different works and poems, whether that was Shakuntala or Meghdut or Kumarasambhava. He talks about Himalayas are the measuring stick on this planet from east to west. So they are stretching. They are king of the mountains, and he also mentioned they have a divine presence. So you can already say the regional cooperation framework was already provided before Christ. That's only one aspect of it. And if we see our epics, Ramayana, Mahabharata, in Ramayana we say Hanumanji went to get Sanjeevani from Oshadi Parvat and took some breaths near Sikkim outside Gangtok. And similarly in Mahabharata we say that Arjuna came to Himalayas to get the divine weapons from Lord Shiva. Or Ravana, for instance, in Ramayana goes to Himalaya, Kailash Mansarovar, and prays to Lord Shiva to get the boon of immortality. So we have a cultural linkage to our Indian Himalayan region and overall Hindu Kush Himalayas as such. But things have changed. It is a much more interdependent but crisis-oriented world. When I say crisis, we have crisis of ecology, we have crisis of economy, we have social crisis, and they are ideological crises. And when I say ideological crisis, the nations are following different ideology in the Indian Himalayan region and its neighboring states, right from Afghanistan up to Myanmar. These ideologies are our political system. It can be conservatism, it can be neoclassical liberalism, it can be populism in a particular nation. So I think all these varieties of governance and policy and institutional setup accordingly are prevailing in all of the countries. And this is the reason why India, almost like a decade back, has come out with a foreign policy which is really talking about 5 key principles. It's talking about neighborhood first. That means India would really like to develop its economic cooperation, environmental cooperation, people-to-people contact with the neighboring countries. And second is what we call as non-interference. The non-interference is that we don't, as a nation, want to get into internal matters of our neighbors. Third is, of course, economic cooperation. We'd like to have a shared prosperity in and within the region. Fourth is security, which is increasingly getting more and more complex because given the geopolitics in this area, which is closely linked to the Himalayan region. If you ask ourselves a very, very important question, Indian Himalayan region has borders with 6 countries. And if you see original J&K prior to 1948, 1947, the region had borders with 7 countries. So you are living in an atmosphere where regional cooperation, transboundary cooperation is a given thing, I would say. And last but not least, principle of our nation as a foreign policy principle is cultural diplomacy. I think that's very essential. If you see the Himalayas, how important they were even historically, where this whole cooperation, interaction, people-to-people contact was there. You only have to think about Fahian in 4th century. He comes from all the way from China, comes to India, stays here for 10 years out of his 13 year outside China, and takes the Buddhist knowledge, wisdom back to his country. Hyan Sutian in 7th century comes from China, does the same thing. And it's not one-way traffic. Also from India, if I may only talk about two key personalities, Kumarajiva has origin in Kashmir, but being part of the Kucha dynasty, went to China and spread Buddhism. And you have all these cases and examples right from Afghanistan up to Arunachal Pradesh and Myanmar, that there is a close basis of networking and a kind of a transboundary connect, even long time before. And I may only nominate also one more person there, Guru Padmasambhava, who from Rivalsar, Kashmir, Ladakh, finally went to Tibet and then known as Guru Rinpoche all across Mahayana Buddhism, right from Ladakh up to Bhutan. So you have a given cultural legacy, and I think India has done well to use cultural diplomacy as one of its principles in its foreign policy. Now, if we come to the Himalayas, we are in a turmoil when it comes to the problems. And I said we have social problems, ecological problems, and I think our development paradigm at the end of the day has been accordingly customized. Now, the world came out with Sustainable Development Goals, and I definitely would like to start with SDG number 17 because it talks about partnerships, it talks about collaboration, it talks about multi-stakeholder platforms which can be built as a basis for, in a way, sharpening the regional cooperation. And regional cooperation in our context, in the Himalayan context, definitely climate, environment, social upliftment, all these issues are very much known to us. But lately we have other problems coming up, disasters, conflicts, I would say also geopolitical conflicts happening here. So therefore, we have seen an era now where sustainability, sovereignty, and even cyber security is becoming a big issue in our Himalayan region. So therefore, I think regional cooperation of future, and in tandem with the discussion which we are having across India at the moment on Viksit Bharat, where India should go till 2047 and what should be we as a nation in 2047. I think that's very important. And therefore, SDG number 17 leads us to a couple of other SDGs. And if I may only mention SDG number 6, which is related to water, and where clearly in the sum of the indicators, the transboundary cooperation is a given thing. Transnational cooperation is a given thing, especially when we talk about Indian Himalayan region. All the rivers, the major rivers in northwest and northeast, they're coming from the Himalayas, whether these are glaciers or monsoon water in some of the rivers. They are a very important SDGs and probably one of the important ones for regional cooperation. Now, if we take, for instance, climate again, the climate action under SDG number 13, which clearly interlaced with the regional cooperation attempts which all should be doing here in the Hindu Kush Himalayan region. And that's something which takes us to also SDG 14 and 15. 15 especially because we are talking about, when we talk about Himalayas, we are talking about landscapes, we are talking about river basins, and on that is dependent several ecosystem services which are emerging from the Himalayan ecosystem and which are basis for regional cooperation. I will talk about few such agreements later, but it's important to know that some basis is already there. And when we talk about these ecosystem services, we get into livelihoods of the people. We get into the lives of the people, and we then are very much getting into the overall development paradigm, what should be in the Indian Himalayan region. Now, as I said, the basis for regional cooperation are already there. And if I might say, there are several types of agreements, MOUs, principles which countries have been adopting in the region. And if I may say, for instance, bilateral agreements. Yes, there are several bilateral agreements between nations. For instance, Indo-Nepal, just in 2022, there was an MOU between the two ministries which are related to climate and forests and environment. They had an MOU on cooperation on biodiversity conservation. Similarly, there are also regional agreements, and some of them have worked, some of them have not worked. For instance, if you talk about SAARC is in a way in a suspended animation. So therefore, the countries are promoting and probing different regional agreements like BBIN, SASEC, where India is trying to forge relationship with other nations apart from conflict nations. Fine, the other countries are doing the same, which are in conflict with India at the moment. So these are the other possibilities where we are trying transboundary cooperation, inter-country cooperation by these regional agreements. But important thing when it comes to regional cooperation are the national legislations. Unless you have national policies, programs and strategies which are linking our Himalayan development, because it's a transboundary context with other countries, they become some kind of an important subject, whether we have a, for instance, mountain development policy, whether we have a policy of regional cooperation which is linked to biodiversity conservation, climate change, climate actions, community to community, cultural linkages, which, as I said, historically were there. If you only see the Taklakot market prior to 1962 between India, Nepal, China, and also Indo-Myanmar border, where the people from one community would go to the other country, and every month there would be a kind of a trans-border market. All these examples are there. So therefore, we need to really look into our national legislation, whether we are promoting, adding value to former and existing cooperative, examples which were there across the border and between the states also. I will come to that as well, our own Indian mountain states. And then there have been always local agreements between the countries. Some of us might know, but certainly there have been local agreements where province to province of a different country are coming together. For instance, in Nepal, they have a very close connect with the Tibetan Autonomous Region, where we know that in the winter months, there is hardly any fodder left in Tibetan plateau. So therefore, what Nepal has an agreement that it makes in a particular province silage, and silage is then sold to Tibetan Autonomous Region. And in the summer months, the livestock from Tibetan Autonomous Region comes to Nepal, and it's an agreed local, context where things certainly are much more friendly and can be built on, can be value added. So similarly, there has been examples. I need not to say too many examples, but I think we can build on that. Last but not least, there have been always non-binding agreements, MOUs between countries, which is on the paper. That, for instance, at the moment there is we know that we had a conflict with China 5 years back, and in 2024, through the negotiations, India and China have come to some agreement that in those areas where people were, yak herders were grazing previously, those areas could be again, if they are not conflict zone, they could be opened again for yak grazing, for instance. So all these, I would say arrangements are existing. And how do you really build, in a way, value to these, agreements and MOUs, and I would say also cooperative frameworks which are there. And I must talk about Isimod's work, which easily can be built upon. And we had regional cooperation frameworks, Kailash landscape, Kanchenjunga, and and a very good project between India, Myanmar, and China, where we had regional cooperation frameworks. And this can be relooked by Indian government, and we can really see how we can add value to these regional cooperation frameworks and take the regional cooperation forward till we find a solution for SAARC as a regional agreement. But let me come first to inland, because we talked about regional cooperation for the Himalayas. I would do one thing, and I think this is one of the tasks which NIHE can take with other collaborative frameworks, because we must understand without collaboration we cannot overcome the challenges, whether these are climatic, biodiversity, local economy, we cannot. And I think there are several quotes on that, and you can keep on doing many things on that. And therefore we need to be imaginative. And that's why Albert Einstein said, he said that imagination is much more important than knowledge, because knowledge is very limited. We are always looking for new knowledge in, again, value chains, in biodiversity conservation, but imagination encircles the world. So I think NIHE can be imaginative when it comes to inland cooperation between the mountain states. Of course, institutions like IMI and other key institutions are working on that and picking up issues which are linked to the Himalayas. But I would say pick up all the state action plan for climate change of all the mountain states and see where are the commonalities between these action plans, and find also where are the gaps and where are the opportunities for a kind of a regional platform within India for the mountain states. This will help in a way if NIHE also does this analysis and then involves other institutions, IMI, ICIMOD, civil societies, and comes out with what are the policy requirements for inland cooperation between the mountain states. And based on that, maybe one of the recommendation would be that we need a Himalayan Development Authority. And this Himalayan Development Authority can have several portfolios, and these portfolios will emerge from climate action plans. And this Himalayan Development Authorities will also work with some main institutions which are working here in the Himalayas. And I think NIHE is very much manifested in policy domain. It is linked to Mountain Division of Ministry of Forest, Environment and Climate Change. So there is a good opportunity to get into this. And all this community to community exchange, best practices sharing, having common framework and code of conduct for carbon business in future, because Ministry of Forest has already come out with green carbon credit framework, and we should really build on that. I think there's enough scope for inland cooperation in the Himalayan mountain states, because Himalayas are different. So I think this dialogue must go further, and that will be the basis for regional cooperation when it comes to inland. This could be one entry point which we all should work towards in future. Second is, of course, transboundary cooperation. Let's not forget, if we take only Kailash landscape, you have 4 rivers which emerge from that landscape. So the whole eco-development, upstream, downstream linkage, biodiversity corridors, mega biodiversity zones, which yesterday at NIHE in the Himalaya Conclave, several esteemed personalities we are talking about. So I think these could be then developed further. And as I mentioned, we should relook into these regional cooperation frameworks which ICIMOD had come out with, build on that, because NIHE was part of that, Wildlife Institute of India was part of that, those frameworks. So I think these can be relooked, how we can add value to those frameworks and build the regional cooperation despite conflicts. We can't deny that those conflicts are not there, but we know that there are softer targets which we can aim for. Softer targets could be, again, as we all been talking about, science, policy, and the practice, how they can be linked. So community to community approach can be always linked. Scientists can always come together regionally, mountain level institutions, they can always come together and work together for Himalayan problems. And how to really look for new research, applied research, which policymakers are looking for. They are looking for evidences before they come out with. Because here in India, we've been always cribbing about we don't have a mountain development policy. But how can a mountain development policy come if somebody writes it in Delhi? So we have to really see what I mentioned, the NIHE, with other institutions should come together and work towards this mountain development policy. And as I mentioned, state action plans for climate change can be the basis because it is supposed to be a very holistic, set of plans, and they can be really looked into. Now coming back to transboundary cooperation, I think we know that there are several non-binding agreements, there are several community-to-community approaches. One thing could be certainly we are all talking about climate actions, and disasters have again transboundary connect. They have also upstream, downstream connect. I think there should be no hesitation to start also a process of dialogue wherever it's possible. Indo-Nepal, it's easily possible. Indo-Bhutan, it's easily possible. So try to build on that. That may be also happening, but I think once we develop those frameworks further, we can learn from there and then maybe see also with the conflicting countries and conflicting zones, despite geopolitics, we may look into some other arenas of work, and the culture can be one of them. Because as I mentioned in my earlier part of this small video, that there have been cultural linkages, and India talks about cultural diplomacy. So how can we really add value to that cultural diplomacy and find those entry points within the Indian Himalayan region and also in the transboundary context? I think that is something which I would certainly like to mention in my small video message. But maybe I go back, take last 1 minute. Let me go back to Seattle, the cheap Seattle in America. The government in Washington sent him a letter and said, we want to buy your land. It's something like somebody wants to buy Himalayas. We want to buy your land. And the chief, Seattle, was surprised but also amused. He said, well, this idea seems to be very vague to me. You want to buy or sell the sky? You want to buy or sell the land? How can you buy the sparkle of water which is in the nature? How can you buy the fragrance of air which is there in the nature? How can you do that? So in a sense, the chief Seattle mentioned that this land doesn't belong to me. I belong to the land. And I think all the esteemed personalities, scientists, and committed people which are in the Himalaya Conclave, and thanks to NIHE, and thanks to personalities which have come to this Himalaya Conclave, I really missed it. They should really think about Himalayas from the spirit that Himalayas doesn't need us. We belong to Himalayas. So therefore, we should really work towards policy, science, and practice. That takes us to regional cooperation. I have given some of the examples. And that also takes us to transboundary cooperation, which is unavoidable in this geopolitically very sensitive world. And I think climate, biodiversity, local economies, and finally disasters are those entry points which should be setting the future framework for close cooperation among the Indian mountain states and among the friendly states across the Himalayas. Thank you very much for your kind attention, and wish this conclave a very, very successful outcome. Would be pleased to also contribute further with NIHE in future. Thank you very much. Namaste.